All right, on your sheet here for the 11th Amendment, it's just got one blank to fill in, and that is that the 11th Amendment, as you can see from the picture, says citizens of one state cannot prosecute another state, meaning that you cannot sue a state you do not live in. The reason for this being, if you are not paying taxes there or voting in that state, you should not have a say in how their policies go forth. So if you are suing for some kind of right, you don't really have that. The 12th Amendment changed the election of the president and vice president to separate ballots. And you can see on the picture there that the person voting now votes with one blue arrow for the president and another blue arrow for the vice president. We have not talked yet about the Electoral College, but that is the way we choose our president in this country. And what the Electoral College does is we, the people, vote for members of the Electoral College, and then they vote for the president and vice president. And before the 12th Amendment, when they would vote for president and vice president, the winner of that election would become president, and whoever ended up in second place became vice president. The drama with that is that, imagine in our last election, that means Joe Biden would be our president right now, and Donald Trump would be our vice president. That would not be a great working situation. So the 12th Amendment just made it where the Electoral College now votes for president and then votes separately for a vice president who was chosen by the president as their running mate. The next amendment, the 13th, is pretty straightforward. It outlawed slavery in the United States. This came about right after the Civil War. The Civil War was fought over slavery. Once the North won, slaves were freed because of the 13th Amendment. The 14th and 15th Amendment also go along with the outcome from slavery being ended, because once the slaves were freed, now we had to figure out what rights this brand new group of freed Americans would have. So the 14th Amendment grants citizenship to anyone born in the United States, which most of these slaves had been. This was the first step towards African Americans gaining power in the United States, as the 14th Amendment first and foremost defines citizenship as anyone born in the United States, which most of these slaves had been. Now, the 14th Amendment also contains a very important part called the Equal Protection Clause, and that was added because people in the government at the time were afraid that some states would not recognize the freed slaves as citizens. Because of this, they added the Equal Protection Clause that says states can never take away one's right to life, liberty, or property, the natural rights we have already talked about in class. This section of the 14th Amendment guarantees civil rights, which are political and socially equality given to people by the government. The 14th Amendment defines citizenship and grants civil rights. The final amendment dealing with freed slaves at the time of the Civil War is the 15th Amendment, which said no one can be denied the right to vote based on their race or color. These Civil War amendments make perfect sense if we're trying to give African Americans equality. First, you have to be a human being, and slaves were seen as property. So the 13th Amendment gets rid of them as property, makes the slaves humans. Once you're a human, there's lots of humans on this planet. We want you to be an American. So the 14th Amendment turns these humans into Americans through citizenship. And once you're an American, to have power in our country, you have to have the right to vote. And the 15th Amendment gave African Americans the right to vote. Now, there were some groups that were not included in this amendment. Women were still not allowed to vote, whether they were white or African American, until the 20th Amendment. And Native Americans were not considered citizens of the country, as crazy as that sounds, until 1924. Next up is the 16th Amendment, and if you remember, one of the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation was our national government could not tax. So in the Constitution, we said that the national government could tax. However, the income tax had always been ruled unconstitutional by the courts because they saw this as a direct tax where the money came out of your pocket before you ever even received it. The government needs that money, so the 16th Amendment makes it where the income tax is now legal. And so because of the 16th Amendment, our national and state governments can collect an income tax straight out of your paycheck. And the Supreme Court could no longer declare the tax unconstitutional because now it is part of the Constitution through an amendment. The 17th Amendment allows senators to be chosen by a popular vote. What this means is originally in our Constitution, the House of Representatives was voted on by the people of each district in a state, but the senators were chosen by the state government. Eventually, this led to corruption, and since we are a republic where the people have the power, it just made sense to let the people of each state vote for their senators. And that is what we are now allowed to do because of the 17th Amendment to the Constitution. The 18th Amendment to the Constitution established prohibition, which is really just the banning of the sale, distribution, or drinking of alcohol. The reason alcohol was banned is many people in our country at the time felt that alcohol caused abuse to women, caused a lack of effort on jobs, and was just overall a negative for our society. A good way to remember this amendment is that at 18 years old, some people try to drink alcohol, but it's not legal. You're not supposed to, so therefore the 18th Amendment, no alcohol. The 19th Amendment finally gave women the right to vote at the national level. Many states already allowed women to vote, but this was in U.S. elections for president, senators, representatives, and that sort. Oftentimes, this is called women's suffrage. The word suffrage just means the right to vote. So the 19th Amendment giving women's suffrage gave women the right to vote. The 20th Amendment set up the days that Congress and President would take office. Congress takes office on January 3rd of each year. That is the first day that our Congress begins working each year. The President takes office on January 20th. That is the day the President is inaugurated every 4 years. This amendment is often called the lame duck amendment, which is why I chose the picture I did. A lame duck is someone who has been fired from a job, but they are finishing up the job. So maybe you have been fired from your job, but you still have to work another 2 weeks. During those 2 weeks, you're not really going to care about doing a great job. And so therefore, the work on the project suffers. This is what we were afraid would happen with a president who is voted out in November by the people, but then has a few months of still working on the job. Before the 20th Amendment, presidents were inaugurated on March 4th, but those 4 months in between the election and the inauguration, if a president lost, they wouldn't work very hard and our nation suffered. So the 20th Amendment moved the day of the inauguration from March 4th to January 20th, and now we should always have a president who is working hard at the job, which is best for our country. The 21st Amendment repealed the 18th Amendment, which means it got rid of the 18th Amendment. And if you remember, the 18th Amendment created a ban on alcohol, so the 21st Amendment brought alcohol back. A great way to remember this one is 21-year-olds can legally drink. So the 21st Amendment made alcohol legal again. The reason for this was that in our national government, they were having a hard time stopping the people from drinking, as there were speakeasies and organized crime getting alcohol to the masses. And if they weren't in charge of it, they couldn't tax it and make money. So by bringing alcohol back legally, the national government could tax it and make money and not have to spend money trying to stop it. So they repealed the 18th Amendment with the 21st and made alcohol legal once again. The 22nd Amendment allows presidents to only have 2 full terms in office. With our Constitution, it said that the president served a 4-year term, but they could serve as many 4-year terms as the people wanted to elect them for. George Washington served 2 terms, and many people wanted him to serve a 3rd, but he said no, that would get to be where he was too much like a king. Because George Washington only served 2 terms, every president after him decided to do the same thing. As we began to come out of the Great Depression in the 1900s, we entered into World War II, and many Americans were scared and facing a lot of fear. Because of that, we didn't want to have a lot of change, and we decided to elect our president, Franklin Roosevelt, for a 3rd term in office. He was eventually elected for a 4th term as well. He died during this term, and people soon realized that as president through 4 terms, he had began to gain too much power. Because of this, we decided never again would we give a president the option of running for a third or fourth term, and we put the 22nd Amendment into place that says presidents can only serve 2 full terms. All right, the 23rd Amendment gives people in Washington, D.C. the chance to vote for president. The reason they couldn't vote for president before this is because our Electoral College decides how many votes a state gets for president based on the number of representatives and the number of senators that state has. Well, Washington, D.C. is not a state, so it has no representatives or senators. So until the 23rd Amendment, they did not have any votes for president. Once the 23rd Amendment passed, the 23rd Amendment assigned 3 votes to Washington, D.C., so they would be the smallest number allowed, making sure that they would not be powerful or more powerful than any state. The 24th Amendment deals with the poll tax, which is defined as a tax to vote. The poll tax was used as a way to keep certain groups from voting in America. If you look at it, any tax to keep people from voting would probably mean that it's keeping the poor from voting, but specifically, this tax was meant to keep Black Americans from voting in the South. If a poor white voter in the South came to vote and it was $1 to vote, they might be told, just pay $2 next year. But if a poor Black voter came to vote, they would be told, if you don't have $1, you can't vote. And this is how the poll tax was used. Next is the 25th Amendment. It was used to set up presidential succession, which is just the order of who takes over as president if our president dies, resigns, or is impeached and found guilty. We needed this because even though we had set up this order of succession, it had changed through the years, and we wanted to make the one we had used for a while official. The order of succession set up by the Constitution in the 25th Amendment is if the president leaves office, the vice president takes over. If both of those positions leave office, the Speaker of the House would become president. If all 3 of them leave office at the same time, such as in a plane crash or something like that, the President pro temp of the Senate, the oldest senator, would take over. And if all 4 of those positions leave office at the same time, the Secretary of State would become president. The 26th Amendment lowered the voting age from 21 to 18. And the reason we did this was because this was during the Vietnam War, and young men were going over to fight in the Vietnam War. It was an unpopular war, and yet they weren't allowed to vote for the leaders that were sending them there. So the statement of, if you're old enough to fight, you're old enough to vote, became popular, and the voting age was lowered to 18 so that soldiers who were over there fighting could vote for leaders who wanted to keep them there. And the final amendment is the 27th Amendment. It states that Congress cannot give itself a pay raise, and if they do, it does not take effect until the next session. The history of this amendment, I'll fill you in on when I get back.